Welcome to Good Talk English Podcast.
Have you ever felt that sudden just sinking panic when your phone dies and the room goes completely quiet and you realize you are suddenly alone with absolutely nothing but your own thoughts?
Oh, yeah. The instant panic.
Right, your hand just instinctively reaches for a charger or a remote or I don't know, a magazine, literally anything to make the silence stop. And it really makes you wonder, why are we so deeply terrified of our own company?
I mean, it is basically the defining anxiety of our era. We treat silence like a predator that we just have to outrun. We use music, endless scrolling, anything to create this wall of background noise to protect us from the void of just being alone in a room.
Yeah, exactly. And so today we're doing a deep dive into a really profoundly personal Arabic reflection from a channel called Talk of the Soul. And it totally flips that exact panic on its head.
It really does.
It chronicles this radical transformation, moving from a paralyzing fear of isolation to actually making solitude the safest, most comfortable place in life. So our mission in this deep dive is to explore the critical difference between the pain of loneliness and the power of solitude. And, figure out how stepping away from the noise is actually the ultimate shortcut to discovering who you truly are.
Right. And to really grasp the weight of this transformation, we have to look at the starting line because, well, it mirrors how most of society operates. Initially, the perspective here was that isolation was this glaring sign of failure. It was perceived as this painful, empty void.
Which is how we're all conditioned, right?
Exactly. Think about the social conditioning we all go through. You watch groups of people laughing in cafes. You see, the endless photos of social gatherings online. And the natural assumption is that comfort and happiness only exist in crowds.
Yeah, if you're alone, you're missing out.
Right. The fear of silence was so intense for the author that every single waking moment had to be filled with a task or a noise or just a random message just to keep that creeping feeling of loneliness at bay.
Which is such a universally relatable starting point. Nobody wants to be the person sitting alone. But then the paradigm shifts in this reflection. We move from running from the silence to realizing what that silence actually represents. It's not just an absence of noise.
Well, not at all.
It's an introduction to a complete stranger. And that stranger is ourselves.
That is the core realization.
Yeah.
And, what makes this reflection so authentic is that this pivot towards solitude wasn't some highly curated wellness retreat. It wasn't an enlightened choice made on a mountaintop.
It was forced.
Yeah, exactly. It was born out of absolute crushing exhaustion. Circumstances basically forced a hard stop. The energy required to endlessly chase after every relationship, every social obligation, and, every bit of external validation, it simply ran out.
I remember reading about that initial phase of slowing down, and it just sounds agonizing. Sitting alone felt incredibly uncomfortable at first. There was this desperate search for distraction because fundamentally there was no internal relationship to fall back on.
Right, there's nothing there.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. It reminds me of how our devices work. It's like we're constantly running all these heavy background apps, Reliable Friend 2.0, Perfect Employee OS, Family Problem Solver, and those apps are just draining our battery to zero.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
We are highly trained customer service reps for everyone else's lives, but we put our own calls on indefinite hold. So I have to ask, how do we get to a point where we are so hyper-connected to the entire globe, but just completely alienated from our own minds?
Well, what's fascinating here is we get there by treating our attention as a commodity that belongs to everyone but us. The paradox is just striking. I mean, you can know exactly what your friends hate, you know precisely what your family needs to hear to calm down, and you know how to navigate your coworkers' bad moods.
You're an expert on everyone else.
Exactly. But if someone asked you, hey, when was the last time you were genuinely rested? Or what do you actually need right now? You would probably draw a total blank.
100%.
You become so preoccupied with managing the external world that your internal landscape turns into alien territory. You don't know when you're sad. You don't know when you're burned out. You just keep, executing the programming.
That is such a heavy concept to sit with. Walking around in a body, carrying a mind, and not even knowing the owner.
And when you're a stranger to yourself, of course silence is terrifying. Because silence forces you to sit across the table from that stranger. The fear isn't actually about being physically isolated. The fear is about stopping the momentum. When you stop, the external noise fades and the internal truth gets incredibly loud.
But wait, if we recognize this massive problem of self-estrangement, how do we actually fix it? How do you take that frightening, forced isolation and turn it into the intentional, healing solitude we are talking about today?
Well, it requires sitting through the discomfort of the withdrawal. And it is a withdrawal. When the external noise finally drops away, you start hearing your own internal voice for the very first time. And let's be clear, it is not an instant wave of zen.
Right. It's not all peace and quiet immediately.
No, the first things you hear are the emotional backlog. You hear your old fears. You hear the dreams you delayed for a decade. You hear the difficult structural questions about your life that you have been actively avoiding by staying constantly busy.
The terrifying questions you can only ignore when the TV is blaring and your phone is vibrating every 3 minutes.
Exactly.
Uh,
But by refusing to run away from that emotional backlog, something really profound happens. The perspective shifts. Solitude stops being an escape from humanity or a sign of social failure. It becomes a sanctuary, a safe space to actually process that backlog, organize tangled thoughts, catch a breath, and just rebuild the exhausted parts of the soul.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me. It's how that rebuilding process happens. It isn't through massive sweeping life changes. It happens in a tiny, agendaless moments.
Yeah, the small things.
Right. Finding profound joy in just drinking a morning coffee without mentally rehearsing a meeting, reading a few pages of a book without checking the time, sitting by a window and just watching the sky. And I have to say, in our hyper-optimized modern culture, doing absolutely nothing sounds almost like an act of rebellion.
Oh, it completely is.
We are so deeply conditioned to believe that every single second needs an ROI, like a return on investment. If an activity isn't making you smarter, richer, or more popular, it's considered a waste of time.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that mindset completely breaks our nervous systems. We are addicted to achievement over existence. By doing nothing, you are actually retraining your brain's dopamine baseline. You are unconditioning that ROI mindset.
Just existing for the sake of existing.
Right. And stepping away to look at the sky isn't about building walls because you suddenly resent people. It is about taking off the heavy societal armor. Society demands performance. Solitude is the singular place where you can exist without needing to prove your utility to anyone. It is a space entirely free of performance.
I'm listening to this, and a part of me is panicking on behalf of the listener. If I just take off all my armor, shut down my background apps, and retreat into this internal sanctuary, aren't I just abandoning the people who rely on me? Doesn't stepping away and focusing this intensely on our internal world risk making us completely self-centered?
That is the exact fear that keeps most people trapped in the noise. The assumption is that pulling back means losing touch with life and losing your loved ones. But the reality uncovered in this source is the exact opposite. Solitude doesn't make you self-centered. It acts as a high-definition filter for your relationships.
A filter how? What is it actually filtering out?
The people-pleasing exhaustion. Previously, the author had this habit of giving equal frantic energy to everyone in order to maintain a social safety net. That blurs the lines between true friends, the people who genuinely nourish your soul, and the people who are just, as it is perfectly phrased in the reflection, used to your presence.
Oh, wow. Used to your presence. That is a really sharp, painful distinction. There's a huge difference between someone who loves you and someone who just likes the utility you provide them.
Exactly. And when you step back into solitude, you disrupt that utility. You see very clearly who reaches out to check on your well-being and who just gets annoyed that you aren't available to solve their problems anymore.
That is so true. It really exposes the transactional relationships.
It does. The realization here is that not everyone who passes through our lives is meant to hold a permanent lease. You learn to fiercely cherish the brief, honest conversations that actually bring tranquility to your day while deliberately distancing yourself from the one-sided relationships that leave a heavy, lingering toll in your heart.
So, by pulling back, you aren't abandoning your relationships at all. You are actually saving the ones that matter. You are clearing out the social clutter.
Solitude saves our relationships because it breaks the cycle of using people as emotional crutches. When you frantically seek external validation to fill an internal void, your friendships become transactional. But when you are deeply comfortable with your own company, you don't need a friend to validate your existence. You can finally just appreciate them for who they are.
So the value shifts entirely.
Right. The value of your social circle shifts entirely from the sheer quantity of contacts in your phone to the honesty and depth of a select few.
That makes perfect sense. But filtering out exhausting people is really only the external half of the battle. The internal work is where the real transformation happens. And that brings us to how we treat ourselves when nobody else is watching.
This is the crux of the entire journey. Solitude morphs from a resting place into a silent teacher. And the most difficult, vital lesson this teacher imparts is simply this. You do not have to be okay all the time.
Which sounds simple, but it shatters how most of us operate. We treat our own negative emotions like a logistical burden. If we feel sad or tired, we suppress it, discard it, and force ourselves to appear strong and flawless. We demand that we operate like algorithms, not human beings.
Yes.
And treating a soul like a machine is the ultimate recipe for total burnout.
And solitude forces you to audit that behavior. In the quiet of isolation, you are forced to confront a really harsh, hypocritical double standard. Think about it. We operate with an incredible capacity for grace when it comes to others. If a friend makes a mistake, misses a deadline, or has a mental breakdown, we are the first to offer forgiveness.
We make excuses for them. We tell them to take a day off.
Exactly. We tell them to rest. But when it comes to ourselves, we demand absolute robotic perfection. Every failure is internalized as a fatal flaw.
It is entirely true. We are our own most vicious critics. I mean, if we spoke to our friends the way we speak to ourselves in our own heads, we wouldn't have any friends left.
The ultimate pivot here is toward radical self-compassion. In the quiet, you have to learn to accept that bad days, delayed dreams, and completely failed plans are not indictments of your character. They're just the natural, messy, inevitable textures of the human experience.
You have to give yourself permission to be human.
Right. Solitude teaches you to turn that outward empathy inward. You start treating yourself with the exact same tenderness and patience that you previously reserved exclusively for the rest of the world.
But if you actually start doing that, if you become your own most fiercely loyal friend in private, that completely shatters how you handle pressure from the outside world, right? You can't practice radical self-compassion and still tolerate constant, crushing anxiety about your future, which moves us into the broader spiritual and psychological shifts. How does this internal peace change how we view our place in the universe?
It fundamentally alters your relationship with control. Before this transformation, the baseline state was massive anxiety, this constant exhausting attempt to micromanage the future, needing to guarantee outcomes, needing to know exactly how every 5-year plan was going to materialize. It's a defense mechanism. We try to control the future to feel safe in the present.
So how does sitting alone in a quiet room dismantle that need for control? How do you actually stop that anxiety loop?
Well, through quiet reflection, you begin to recognize the illusion of control. The journal approaches this through the profound Islamic concept of tawakkul, which is a deep, active spiritual trust in God and Allah. It reminds me a bit of the lessons we take from the Cave of Hira, right? Stepping completely away from the noise of society to find spiritual clarity.
Yes, exactly. That intentional seclusion to prepare the heart.
Right. But to break down the mechanism of how this works cognitively in our daily lives, think of it as a massive mental sorting system. You take all your anxieties and divide them. There are things that require your effort and patience, and then there are outcomes that are entirely out of your hands. By actively surrendering those uncontrollable outcomes to a higher power, you are literally freeing up processing power in your brain.
You are letting go of the steering wheel because you finally realize the car's on a track anyway. You do the work, but you drop the obsession over the result.
And dropping that obsession brings an unbelievable lightness to your life. You're no longer carrying the crushing weight of the entire future on your shoulders. And because you aren't living entirely in the future anymore, your fundamental relationship with time completely shifts.
You stop the perpetual rush. Man, I know that feeling so well. Always chasing the next day, always telling yourself like, oh, I'll finally relax when this project is done or when the weekend gets here. You postpone your actual life for a mythical later, but when you drop the anxiety of control, you start noticing the present reality.
You start noticing the warmth of the sunlight through the window, the sound of the rain, the actual taste of the coffee, rather than just using it for caffeine.
And that presence is the ultimate cure for the final boss of modern anxiety, the comparison trap. Think about what you are doing when you scroll social media in a quiet room. You're taking your whole complicated, exhausted, messy reality, the bills, the stress, the unwashed dishes, and you are placing it on a scale next to a 2-second, heavily filtered, artificially lit snapshot of someone else's vacation. Cognitively, it is a rigged game.
It's a game that guarantees you will feel inadequate. Focusing intensely on what you lack and measuring your behind the scenes against someone else's highlight reel makes your own life feel permanently incomplete. It is a psychological trap.
It totally is.
But when you slow down your nervous system enough to practice genuine gratitude for your present blessings, the quiet moments, the breath in your lungs, the small comforts right in front of you, the entire context changes. Solitude is no longer a perceived punishment for not keeping up with the crowd. It becomes a profound, deeply guarded gift.
So, what does this all mean for us? It transforms from a prison cell into a personal sanctuary. You stop running an invisible, exhausting race against people who aren't even paying attention to you, and you finally just start walking at your own pace.
And that is the ultimate takeaway here.
Yeah.
True peace is not an external achievement. It does not come from successfully organizing the chaotic circumstances around you, or curating the perfect social circle, or finally getting everyone to approve of you. You cannot control the noise of the world. True peace is an inside job. It comes exclusively from building a tranquil, honest, forgiving relationship with the person inside of your own mind.
We have covered so much ground today. We started with the sheer panic of a dying phone and the terror of isolation. But we've uncovered that stepping away from the noise isn't a retreat. Isolation isn't a void to be feared. It is the only environment where we can shut down the background apps draining our energy.
Exactly. It's essential.
It is where we filter out the superficial relationships, practice radical self-compassion, and rediscover the voice we silence to keep everyone else comfortable. Stepping away from life for a moment isn't quitting. It is the most sustainable, beautiful way to return to it, bringing your whole healed self with you.
It's the ultimate reset button. When you stop fearing your own company, the world loses its leverage over your peace of mind.
Which brings me right back to the scenario we opened with. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over long after this deep dive ends. Imagine you were forced to sit in a totally silent room for 1 hour right now. No phone, no music, no tasks to hide behind, no distractions at all. Who is the person you would finally meet in that quiet? And more importantly, what is the very first thing they would want to tell you?